much. Just going to go through a few things. We have the program, Historical Society meeting May 10th. That'll be our regular meeting. And it's going to be, there's always room for Jell-O. And Lynn Delucio from Leroy Historical Society, she's also associated with the Genesee Country Village in Mumford. She'll be putting a talk on that. Should be interesting. My wife can't cook Jell-O yet, but I'm sure that as years go by, she'll be. The woman can make some of the most fantastic cakes you ever saw, stacked 6 feet high, 5 tiers, and she can't make Jell-O. That's all right, I forgive her. I make Jell-O if I want. We're going to have the Village of Akron open house at the water plant, Saturday, May 12th. John Asmus is going to be there to give you tours of the water plant, so if you'd like to see where water comes from and how they do that. It's a very interesting facility out there. We're working on the dam and some other projects. Saturday, June 2nd, Newstead Historical Field Trip to Step Back in Time. That's going to be part of the Pan American Exposition of 1901. We'll leave the Bank of Akron parking area at 46 Main Street at 2 p.m. Transportation will be an Akron Central School Bus. Hopefully it won't be too hot because I don't think they're air conditioned. But I don't think we had them when we were young. They weren't air conditioned either. Walking tour will run from 3 o'clock to 5 p.m. to view the historic buildings and locations in Buffalo from the Pan American era. More information, call Amy Bergman. I have her phone number. It's 542-9704. Cost is $15 per person. Deadline for reservations, April 30th. It's coming right around the corner. 4th of July festivities, naturally, that's going to be announced. Akron in Bloom is coming up Saturday, July 21st. We've had interesting tours, and unfortunately, I never have a chance to go on them because I'm working on Saturday. July 27th will be the Historical Society's time to man the refreshment stand at the Akron Band Concert if the weather's good. Midsummer Night Swing, another important event. That'll be Saturday, August 11th from 7 to 11 o'clock, and sometimes we're able to convince the band to stay a little bit later. Tickets will be $22. Sue Houlihan is the person in charge, and you can see any of the board members if you want to get tickets for that. The Starlight Dance Band, catered by the Akron House, and special performance by the Akron Alumni Jazz Quartet, or what do I got? I got lab down here. What does that mean? L-A-B. Is that what they call them, lab? The experiment. Okay. Tonight, the hosts for the refreshments are Teresa and John Asmus. Sue Houlihan and my wife made the cake. We thank you for that. We have a survey box. Some people don't like it, some people do. What we're trying to do is find out if the programs that we've been offering are interesting, and we have you given a scale. So the little box there by the entrance on the table, if you'd have a chance, fill one out, just let us know, so that we can we can plan our programs around what you've enjoyed, and if we don't enjoy them, then we can make them disappear. Things like this program tonight, a lot of work to put together, and the people that work with them, we're very thankful for. They'll be introduced by Lou Nanny pretty quick. Let's see here. Another thing we have we need to have fundraisers. It costs us $12,000 approximately per year to operate the Octagon House and the museum. And if you have any ideas that you think, if you'd like to donate a car and we can raffle it off, we'd love it. So anything that you can think of where we might be able to do some raffling of tickets or anything. We have a lot of events, and it costs us a lot of money for the things that we have, and it's gorgeous, and we want the community to share them. But it does take a lot of work, it takes a lot of money. So if you have any ideas, talk to one of the board members, any of the people up here, Sue Houlihan, myself, my wife, Mary Snyder, Mary Ann Snyder. Is she here? No, not here. Well, don't talk to her then. Spence Wendy was going to do what I'm doing now, and he can't be here. He'll be here a little bit later. He's the vice president, does a good job of running this. What else did I get into? Anything I forgot? Anybody can come up with something I forgot about? Akron, we're going to be busy this year. It's too, I was talking to some people on the way in, it's too bad we have to be older, more mature people to really be interested in history. And the things that these people will tell us tonight, hopefully we can retain and pass on to younger people, because I think the only thing they're interested in right now is going on dates all that kind of stuff, which probably we were interested in at the time we were younger. But it's very important to handle and hand on from generation to generation the things that made this village the village that it is, and important and everything else. And we're very happy to have these people with all the knowledge they have of what Akron was all about a few years ago. And I'll let Lou Nanny now, who's an Akron resident, been born and raised here, and his family, part of it here, and Mary Nanny, we're glad you're here, and Mrs. Fry, that I keep on forgetting is Lou Nanny's sister. I don't know if she's the older sister or he's the older brother, but he tells me not to worry about that. We're glad to see Mr. Overholt, World War II veteran. I don't know if a lot of people know, he was at Pearl Harbor when it started. He was there to see the bombs bursting in there, and also trying to get away from them. So we thank you, Harold, for being here. Lou?
Thank you. This is supposed to be, good evening. This is supposed to be a Cracker Barrel session, and we did have a get-together where we did talk about some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. I don't think, that took about 2.5 hours, arguing over what was really the history, so I don't think we're going to repeat that tonight, but Cracker Barrel, and I'm just going to have Dave Wakeman. Is he here, Dave? Dave, do you want to just explain the barrel that's up here?
When they said it's going to be a Cracker Barrel, somebody asked about barrel. So I think I better get you a barrel, but it turned out to be it's not a Cracker Barrel. It's the one, a small one on the far end. It says a biscuit barrel on it. How many here knows where Wheatville Station is? Wheatville Station? Railroad? Oh, wait. Somebody. I see one or two. Now, Wheatville Station is what South Alabama is now. It used to be called Smithville years ago, and they changed it to Wheatville Station for the South Alabama. But that barrel on the bottom of it, or head of it, that's facing up now, has Wheatville Station on it. It's a biscuit barrel. I forget the name of the store that was shipped to. And I found some pictures of barrels, same as that was shipped on the Erie Canal. But these were all apple barrels. Apples were shipped in them at the time, and I thought might give you a little history on that.
Thank you, and I think this is a whiskey barrel, this one. It looks familiar to me. My dad used to make wine in these whiskey barrels. All right, I'm going to introduce our panel tonight. I'm going to start with the oldest one, and this is Ruth Kratz Zimmerman over here on my far left. She was born in 1911 on Tesno Road, where the Bruning farm is. At that time it was the Tesno farm, and her dad ran the farm. Mr. Tesno, Ed Tesno, lived on the big white house on Exchange Street next to Shad's house, which is on the corner of Main and Exchange. Her dad and mother bought the farm that they live in on it's the Kratz Zimmerman farm on Bloomingdale Road in 1913. She attended the Akron Grammar School, and in that packet of pictures that are being passed around, if you pass them around in your row, you'll see that that's the very first picture that you have in that packet. That's the Akron Grammar School. Looks like a pretty impressive building, and the Akron Grammar School stood where the town hall now stands. She graduated from the Akron Grammar School and then went to the Akron High School, which was located where the Masonic Temple now is, and that's the, I've labeled it number 2 on the pictures that I'm passing around. So she went to school there and graduated in 1928 or 29. Couldn't remember for sure, but then she went to Clarence for a Clarence training class, which was part of high school. It was a 1-year equivalent to the Buffalo Normal School. And once you got through that, you were able to teach in country schools, country elementary schools. So she taught 1 year across the Iron Bridge, which links goes over Tonawanda Creek and links Meadville Road. And that bridge has been out of commission for a number of years. But he would go down through the reservation on Meadville Road. He would go over, and that's where she taught school for 1 year. And then she taught another 2 years, and on the Lewiston Road, which is not very far from there. She got married and moved away from Akron for all of 2 years. And then her mother wanted her to come back to the farm because her mother was not well and she was coming out all the time. And so she moved back to Akron at that time. So 1911, and this is 2001. Oh, okay. Well, you can figure that out. And Ruth, I've asked her to start with just a kind of a story of some recollection that you might be interested in.
Okay. You know, I really doubt that there ever was a woman who sat in a store around a Cracker Barrel with tobacco-chewing men. And I think that I don't see the spittoon. I did live practically all my life right where I am. And for years and years and years, seldom got downtown except to school where we had to walk. And there were a gang of kids that walked from Bloomingdale to Akron School. One thing I remember distinctly, and this was when I was in high school, and I wonder how many of you remember that we had a tag day every year. Who remembers tag day? You know, money had to be raised to support the sports program, and tags, about 3x3 cardboards that had AHS on, had a yellow string tied on them, were sold. Those students who were good students, or at least were considered good students or good salespeople, went around town like the kids, the Buffalo News kids books or papers are sold. Somebody was at the bank, somebody was at the library, somebody was here and there. We sold those tags for $1 a piece. And we made, and that was one day every year, we made money. Seldom, I said, were we as kids in town, simply because we had no transportation except our legs. We walked to school, and that was even when we were in first grade, and it was exactly 2 miles from where I live up to the old, what now is the town hall, and that was the old brick elementary school. And in wintertime, we had long underwear on, and then heavy stockings, and then what was known as leggings, and they snapped up the front. And you know, I'd like to see some of our little kids today doing, in the first place, dressing the way we dress, and in the second place, walking the way we walk. But we did it. And I guess we're no worse for the wear. One thing that we always attended was the 4th of July parade. And one of my memories, and I hope that I am correct, and if I'm not, do correct me, what I always could remember was that a group of women known as the WCTU marched in that parade, and Mrs. Corbett was the president of that WCTU for years, and all of those women had white dresses on. They paraded down Main Street along with the floats, and you know, those floats represented a lot of work by a lot of organizations. I feel, may be better than today. However, that may be a failing memory that I have. Now I will turn it over to number 2.
Thank you. Next one, first I'm going to introduce is Paul Stratton. He was born in 1914 on 14 Marshall Street. That's across the street from Allen's house. And he also attended Red Brick Grammar School, where the town hall is now. And then when he was in 7th grade, he came to the new high school here on Bloomingdale. And I think it opened in 1925. At that, he mentioned to me, was also a period of time when they had the typhoid fever, and they also had a lot of construction going on. They put in the new sewers and the new water lines. He graduated in 1933 from Akron High School, and he worked in the local gas stations for about 5 years. And for 5 years, he worked for Pete Hess, who had the gas station on the corner of Monroe and John Street, where the florist is located now. He also worked at the gas station, which was formerly John Koss's place, and also across the street, which was Kranz's building. That's on the corner of Buffalo Street and John Street. He also went to work for Buffalo Arms. That was when it was located in Cheektowaga. As some of you know, Buffalo Arms eventually did have a plant here in Akron. In World War II, he did spend some time in the Army, and after that he came back and worked in Buffalo Arms again. And then what happened after the war, a lot of plants closed, and so he moved from one plant, especially all those that were tied with military industry, and a lot of those plants, as you know, Bel Air, Curtis, and so on, plants did close after a period of time. Was married, and in 1946 he moved to his current location on Brooklyn Street. And so I'm going to turn this over now to Paul Stratton. Let's see, he was born in 1914. This is 2001.
I don't know where to start.
Just a second. No. Go ahead, talk. You have to talk right in. No, let him do it. Just talk. Go ahead.
When we were kids, we used to like to slide downhill in the summer, winter time. And you were lucky you had a bobsled. We'd start up by the Methodist Church Park, and go down through the park, down John Street, way down to the railroad tracks. Or else we'd go way down around the bottom of John Street. And for a diversion, we'd go down Franklin Street. Go way down to what was then John Dodd's ice cream parlor, which is the Legion Hall now. And that was a tale. We used to go down there, and Mr. Dodd was quite an enthusiast for race horses, sulky horses. And he was an elderly man, but he was a deputy sheriff for the court deputy in Buffalo. He'd ride the train back and forth to work. And well, anyhow, we'd get in there and we'd buy a Mexican Sunday for a dime. Get him talking horses, and we'd have 3 or 4 dozen Mexicans for that one dime. That was a pretty good deal. Yeah. I forgot to tell you, Louis, I had 25 years at Perry's too. That's when it was down in the old plant. It was all bulwark then. But we used to play around the cemetery a lot. We never did go over a gravestone. Never thought of it. But they made a good base, third base, something like that. It'd be good for hiding behind for cops and robbers. I also went to the school up there where Ruth did. I don't know if any of you people remember the principal of the grammar school principal. He's Baldy, we always call him Baldy Madison. That's Harold Madison's father. Oh, he was rough. He slapped me right on the seat on the floor. Today I'd put him in prison. But that's all right. You know, but when you went home, you didn't dare say anything about it to home because you didn't get it again. That was no fooling. Got a lot of good tales to tell about that. Go to John.
Thank you. The next person I'm going to introduce is John Kegabine. And John was born in 1917 on Barnum Road. And it's the farm that's just south of where Clarence Center Road turns and where Barnum Road begins. He went to country school, and I think the country school was right up there on the corner, wasn't it, of Barnum in Maine? But in any case, he went to Parker School, Parker High School, and graduated from there, and took his first job at Bethlehem Steel, where he worked for 32 cents an hour, and gas cost 8.9 cents per gallon. And he worked there till 1941. And he was in the Marine Corps during World War II from 1942 to 1946. When he came back home, he went back to farming. And I know I worked for John Kegabine back in the early 50s. He had a big hay baler, and he would stand up there and like the captain of the ship and give all kinds of orders. And then I know that somebody would stop and they'd stop while they'd have to make some bets on some horses that were going to be running at the racetrack that night. That gave us a little bit of a break. We sold the farm in 1972 after his mother passed away, and he was the first person to live in the mobile home park that's diagonally across from the school here on Bloomingdale Avenue. So with that, let me turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Louis. I'm going to keep sitting because I would be probably laying on the floor after 5 minutes if you let me stand up. I've been down with a bad, double bad cold for 2 weeks. So we'll go from there and take it as it is. I'm getting better. Going way back till about when I was 2 years old, the first thing I can remember very dimly is standing on a church bench in the Calvary Baptist Church, which was built by the German Methodists at my grandfather's funeral. At that time, or shortly after that, in 1922, my dad was elected highway superintendent, and that's something that any kid should have the privilege of doing, because he's traveling the town and you're walking, running around, hanging onto his hand, but you learned the whole township very well. Akron was always here, but there was villages here, not a real village, but little communities like South Newstead, with a hotel and a store, Swift Mills, Sand Hill. They all had their things to do, but they all came to Akron on Saturday night because the bank and the grocery stores were open usually till 10 o'clock. Did your shopping, and then you went to the band concert, which was on all while you were in town. Quite a thing in the old days. It was a mile from our farm to the first schoolhouse I attended, and that was always a walk in the morning, unless Dad was going with the team somewhere. He got hopped on the sleigh or the wagon and got a ride. And there was many times when the road didn't get plowed. It's too much snow to take care of, that we went in the field with the team and the bobs because it was a lot easier traveling. You might go a half a mile and pull out on the road again. I'm glad to see so many people here tonight, and I can proud and see people from every case I've mentioned so far. But I forgot the name of what they call the kids from Nice Road. What was it, Butch? Pine City Schoolhouse was a mile north of where I went. And Arbor Day, we had a ball game. It was just kids up to the 8th grade, and that was quite a time. Then finally we got on the Parker, and then usually we get, well, we walked home a lot of times, but then they got a school bus, and one school bus at Parker, and 100 children, and they hauled them in from Maine and Transit, from Rapids, from the county farm and penitentiary, and the jail, to Parker High School. We had 100 kids in the high school. Had a very tough time getting 6 to be eligible to play basketball. Never did have a football team, but we did. We played in the, well, that was always competitive for me because I was in Sunday school in my young years, and the Akron teams were in the same Sunday school class. We always had a little bit of rivalry in church and out of church. There'll more things come up, and I hope that any things that we say or talk about in the future, that it will generate you people to bring up something you want to talk about in your area. Maybe we can add to it, or maybe you can help us out. Thank you, Louis.
Thank you, Jan. And I have to say one thing. I had my first job actually also with John Kegabine. The second year I worked for Baling Hay, we said, you know, for the rate that we're getting, we're not gonna work unless you give us more money. And he wanted to know if everybody was for this. Of course, we stuck together and we got a raise. The next person I want to introduce is John Eckerson. John Eckerson was born in 1921, and he was born in that big greenhouse that's, I think it's on Monroe. Is that Monroe? Buffalo Street or Monroe? Buffalo Street. Right next to what the Carriage Apartments or the Odd Fellows Hall, next to John Coss's. There's a big greenhouse that's set back there. It's got stained glass windows. And then he lived on 80 Eckerson Street, where his father, I guess, probably built a house there. And he started kindergarten here in this school in 1925, and was the first class to go all the way through school here and graduate in 1939. And he graduated as a class valedictorian. He told me to make sure that I mentioned that. But from there, she went to college at Cornell University. And after that, he said he worked for a year and a half in Boston in a landscaping, as a landscaper. I'm not sure, in a landscaping business. But I forgot to ask him if it was Boston, New York, or Boston, Massachusetts. Then he came back to Akron, and he worked as a substitute for about a year and a half. Then he became a science teacher at the school here, and then he stayed here and stayed here and stayed here, and he stayed here 43 years in the Akron schools, and he retired in 1991. And I will say that I had him as a science teacher when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and he was a fantastic teacher. So, Jen?
Thank you, Louis. I have put some pictures on the table, a round table, and I had them all neatly glued down with sticky both sides tape, but if you ever find it won't work. So their pictures, if they're not hustled around too much, are explained. I've written on them. I was responsible for killing Louis Belger. In 1921, Louis Belger, who lived down on Buffalo Street, was very, very ill and almost dying. And I was, in my first few months of life, right across the alley in the greenhouse on Buffalo Street. And my mother has told me this. I wouldn't remember it at all. But when I would holler and yell at night and cry, remember I was just a few months old, it would keep Louis Belger awake while he was trying to die. And my mother said all he did was swear at me in German across the alley. Louis Belger was a real builder in those days. He built 156 of the houses in Akron. They're all over the, I live in one of them now, as a matter of fact. In the pictures that I put on the table over there, one of them shows a hardware store, which was owned by my grandfather. And I remember that store was very narrow. It's now the clothing store. Trying to find the name of it. Well, I forgot to put it on this, but it's a clothing store where they, right across from the bank, yellow building with a red trim. Some of you know where it is. Yeah, that was a hardware store, and it was very narrow, of course, as you know. And to get all the material in the hardware store, the shelves went up to the ceiling. And to get up on the shelves, get what you needed, or what was needed, my grandfather had a ladder that rolled on a track. Some of you may remember that. When I was very small, my big gag was to get to the back of the store with a ladder, give it a shove, try to crawl up to the top of it before it hit the front wall. And I made 2 tries at that, and my grandfather got rid of me then. I also remember the history of the Ackersons. They came into Akron from off DeWitt Clinton's old barge canal near Knowlesville. And my branch of the Ackersons came to Akron in 1835 and lived at the house where Kenny Poggles lives. How many know where Kenny lives now, up off the New Park? Okay. And he had a blacksmith shop downtown where the parking lot is for the machine shop, right on Buffalo Street. And he used to take his horse and buggy home every night from the blacksmith shop, drive down Brooklyn Street, and then turn up and go up a dirt road, which you can still see up that dirt road and to his house every night. And somebody, Hoover Stapleton years ago, told me that hill was known as Toon Hill because my great-great-great-grandfather's name was Tunis, which was an old Dutch name, I guess. And I've, as Louis said, I've been here quite a while. My house over on where I grew up was over on Eckerson Avenue. My bedroom window looked out upon the new schoolhouse. Ugh. Every time I woke up and opened my eyes, I could see the schoolhouse. And I was so pleased not to have to see that anymore. Except that I spent a total, including my kindergarten years, a total of 56 years marching up and down these halls. That's half a century, I have to remind myself. But Akron is, I think Akron and Newstead are the best places in the world to be, and I will leave that thought with you for now.
Okay, now I'm going to turn this over to the panel, and they can talk about what we talked about the other night, or whatever comes to mind, but we do invite questions from the audience, or if you have some story, a reminiscence that you want to share, that would be fine too. The other thing that I ask is because of the acoustics, is that you stand and you speak up. Okay, I'm turning it over to you guys.
Now concerning this Louis Belger, who built those houses in town, John mentioned that he was on his deathbed. That man was a big man, and I mean he was a big man. When he died, they could not, I don't know whether they built the casket in the house, but they couldn't get it out. It wouldn't fit out of the door. There happened to be a big picture window in the front of that house. They had to take the big picture window out so that they could get his body out. And I can remember my mother telling about that. What else?
I can add a little bit to that. my dad and his brother Bill were on the front end of that casket when it came out the window. He was well over 350 pounds. It was a heavy go that day. Let's go back to a little bit about communication and travel. Akron in 1900 was a very self-sufficient community. Everything they needed was done right here. There was a leather factory, a flour mill, anything about you wanted to do, it was built here. And it could stay by itself. And we had 3 railroads. The first one that came up from Edina, you've all read about that, the pulled by the horses up there with the salt, usually went as far as Richville, which was now Pembroke. Then you got the peanut line, ran from North Tonawanda to Canandaigua, then they shut it off at Caledonia. And that was the most profitable line that New York Central had. Every little town had a feed mill where they sold coal and feed and whatever else that farmers had to use. They had to go there to get it. And then the West Shore came along, and it's named the West Shore because it went down the West Shore thus. The Big Four, the Central is just up, we know, everybody knows where that is. That went down the East Shore.
I'll add something here. You're all aware that we're getting close to the celebration for the Pan American Exposition, which was held in 1901 in Buffalo. And that brings to mind to me that my house was built from lumber salvaged from the Pan American by Louis Belger. He bought a railroad car full of used lumber and built all our houses on what we call fondly Belger Heights. Stone's Drugstore, which is now the H&R Block outfit, was once owned by Grover Cleveland between 1876 and 1891. And when Mike George was fixing up his store, he noticed downstairs somebody had scribbled all over the side of the stairway in the cellar. And it said John Eckerson. And I can't understand I wasn't down there to do that, but it was my great-grandfather who lived from 1825 to 1896. And Mike was good enough to let me have the board off the side of the stairs, which I now have in my collection.
All of you have seen changes on Main Street. It is my guess that right now there approximately are 24 stores or businesses of some kind. I wonder if you have any idea over the years how many businesses were on Main Street. Would you venture a guess? 129 at least. There were. I remember the hardware store. You know it as Sherwood's Hardware Store. It was to the credit of the owner that every morning he took the American flag, which he had folded neatly, carried it across Main Street, and had it flying in the park. At night, when he closed his store, he walked across the street, brought the flag down, folded it neatly, and took it back. And that went on for his lifetime. As you passed that store, there usually was a woman sitting in a chair by the window. I think she didn't miss much of anything that went on Main Street. And I think she was a deterrent to the kids who like to raise devilment, especially squirting water out of fountains that were there. And I can remember, no matter what, you see these things in your mind. And that store, you could just about get anything you wanted in the line of hardware. And I, for one, am sorry to see the present hardware store leaving. Okay, what's the next?
I was going to tell you about something around there at the school. Years ago, there was several different sections of the town. Each of the young gay boys, they would have their own group. They'd build shanties and be real bad, go down there and smoke corn soak or something like that. Well, it was where the tennis courts are on East Avenue now. There used to be a trestle went across there. And down at the base, one bunch of buildings, like cabin down there, they wouldn't let anybody else in it as they closed membership. Well, one guy wanted to get in there, so he burned it down one night, so he didn't have one. And up and back to school, there was a crusher. You've probably seen it up there. Remains of Maury up there. Well, there was an old dynamite house down the woods. And I was actually built it up there. Well, he burned that. So they got down, there wasn't any school here then. And so they dug a deep hole, made a room down in there. And they'd had a kerosene lamp and a table. Then they decided to build a school up here. Well, the contractor come out and he's looking for the necessary place. He built it right on top of that hole, and that was the end of that. And the railroad track used to run from East Avenue, across from the tennis courts, across John Street, down beside where the school parking lot is, across Bloomingdale, past the old button shop, then we went down and hooked onto the West Shore. We found an old car. It was just two railroad axles and wheels and a wooden framer on it. We used to get it way up on top of Mason where that train would track it on the track, of course. We'd get it going, then we'd get out, jump on and ride all the way down there. And heaven help us if there's a car coming down Bloomingdale. Then we'd have to work like crazy to get it back up again. It was fun.
You've no doubt all seen this picture and that thing that was passed around. That was the old Akron Bandstand, which was built in 1906. And there's only one other person in the room I know of, maybe two or three, that ever played in a band in that bandstand. It was built so that to get into it, into the top, you walk up an inside stairway, and when you got up to the top and ready to play, the trombones had to stand there and shut the trap door, then sit on the trap door. And when we were late getting there, Dick Klotzbach and I would once in a while be late. The trombones were already sitting on the door and we couldn't get up, so we climbed up the electric conduit on the back of it and over the fence and got in. Did that a couple of times. The bandstand originally had a refreshment stand in the front of it, and on this picture you can see the front space where it was, and then they had lavatories for women on one side and men on the other. And the stairway to get up into the bandstand went up past the men's lavatory, which after, I guess, probably 50 years, got a little rank. And if you could survive getting up the stairs, you could play the rest of the concert pretty well.
Among the stores on Main Street, some of you may remember a shoe store, Buckley's. Did you know that he delivered shoes in baskets down Bloomingdale? On Bloomingdale lived a lot of families below me and before our place, and there were lots of children. they could not get to town unless they walked to buy shoes. And Mama would be the one who had to take them. Well, he was so darn nice that he would say to those mothers, I will bring shoes. And he would fill a couple of baskets with pairs of shoes that he felt might be suitable for the kids. He would bring them down to the houses, try them on. If they fit, fine, he made a sale. If not, he would write down what he thought might be the possible size and width, and in a couple of days, he would be back with a couple of more pairs of shoes. I don't know of anyone else who ever did that in Akron or around town. And some of you will remember that any number of the Indian women walked from the reservation to the main street of Akron, where there was a bus stop, and I am told that the lights are still on the front of one of the buildings, that the lights that were flashed when the bus was supposed to stop and pick up people to take them to Buffalo. These Indian ladies had large and reduced size baskets on their backs, and in their hands they had sassafras. They would catch the bus in the morning, go into Buffalo, sit on some corner of Main Street until they sold their wares, catch the bus back to Akron, buy groceries with their money, and walk back to the reservation. And if you are lucky enough to have one of their baskets, really well-made baskets, you have a treasure. Yes.
I guess it's my turn again. Still talking about transportation, who's been taking the bus, the blue bus. The first bus I remember is the yellow bus that went from Buffalo, Akron to Lockport. George McClure drove it. And the last time he ran was when he got hit by the train on the Cedar Street crossing. You can number on your hands the people that used to catch the bus every morning. Every hour on the hour the bus would be through, and they would stop along the way. Many a time I drove my sister up to Route 5 in Barnum when she worked in Buffalo, and just wait a few minutes, the bus would be along, and he always knew we were and stopped, picked you up. We talked about being self-sufficient. There was 3 places where you could get feed ground and that, the factory produce, which burned down eventually across the American Legion. The big mill up in Falkirk, Reynolds, Remsen, and Burroughs. Paul knows a lot about that. And Lee Swift had a mill race off of Murder Creek down at Swift Mills, and he ground feed. I got there because he was a supervisor and my dad was a highway superintendent. I had to get payroll stuff put in and that. I always got to tag along and see what was going on. Throw rocks at the fish that you could see in the creek. I'll be back.
I'm not sure I have too much more to say, which may be a relief to you people. But anyway, I think this has been an interesting night, but I'm kind of waiting for somebody in the audience to pose a question. We probably can't answer it, but I'm waiting for the question.
You've got some of those pictures there, so if you have questions.
Big back.
What kind of transportation Mr. Buckley has to take the shoes down?
Oh, Ruth, do you know how Buckley got down to the Bloomingdale area with the shoes?
I don't really know.
Oh.
I believe that it probably was a horse and buggy.
Oh, I'll bet it was too, yeah.
I believe that was.
John,
Yes.
Mr. Buckley probably had a car as soon as he could, because my uncle, Grover, married Buckley's daughter.
Okay.
He always had a nice car.
Among the pictures on the table there, is a couple of them that I want to be sure that you take a look at. One is of the 1922 All-Indian Band. And that's a beautiful picture. I think at home somewhere, if I dug long enough, I'd find the names of the men that were in it. But there always has been an Indian band, and there still is. I think there's another picture there that I wanted you to look at especially. There's one that the store, it's in this picture thing, of the C&E area, which was, there was an apartment in the top floor. And when I was 3 years old, I lived there. And I have a snapshot I dragged out of my old album, put on the table.
You know, we now have the Akron House, a real nice eating place, fancy-dancy. And do you know that years ago that we had a tea room in Akron? Two of our Akron ladies had a lovely, lovely tea room on Main Street. And it was a show place, it was clean, it was nice meals, not Akron House meals, but nice. And we've never had another one.
Where was it located?
I know.
Used clothing store. But next to the barber shop.
Oh, I don't
My
remember.
grandfather's hardware was.
Yeah, right.
Same building.
Same building.
I think that's one of the pictures that you have in there. It's a hardware store.
Oh.
That would be the one right across from the bank. Question for Mr. Overhaus here.
If anybody wants to take pictures of the button factory, the mines are, what's the other? The button factory, the mines, and the burning of the button factory. I have pictures at home. Anybody's walking down the street. And another thing, I had in my house, and one of those windows in the house is gone now, with brass from the Pan American Exposition. I still have the glass. That's the thing.
And he says he has some pictures, we could stop down and see them, but you know the thing is, with today, if you have some old pictures, we can make copies of them and return the originals to you. The copies are so good today, so that I'll stop and get them. Okay. Over here?
I'd like to tell you a little story about the blue buses. I'd like to tell you a little story about the blue buses. They used to come down Main Street, and they stopped right at the corner of the park. Well, this was in the summertime, it was a nice hot day. Oh, so this is during the Depression. Couldn't buy a job. But anyhow, they'd sit down in the park and talk. And one guy, he stretched out on the seat and went to sleep. Well, the rest of them realized it was time for the bus. So they picked him up very quietly and set him right in the middle of Main Street. and the bus driver happened to be a man from Akron. Lloyd Wilson, if you knew him. But he drove the blue bus, he got right up on there and laid right on the air horns. I know they said Rustin didn't come down till he hit the park. They were always pulling something. They started up, one time they started up, and just, if they see people coming, they stopped, see? Shorty Cummings, I don't know if everybody knew him, but he come running down through the park, and the bus stopped. He went around the corner and run right in the Oasis. They were always doing some game, nothing malicious, but it's a game.
I spoke before about the,
Just speaking of old cars.
I'm not talking this is my protection.
Go ahead.
About standing in the pews in the German Methodist Church. Well, Ruth Zimmerman's grandfather was on the committee when they built that church, had 4 plate liner, 4 picture windows, 11 windows, and the inscription that went over the front door. And they cost $265 delivered out here and installed. The whole church itself, there's only four windows in the church, it was a small one. It cost $1,573. I gave the receipt that was in some books I had from the church to the Historical Society, so you've got it tucked away somewhere. And it's sold in 1920. My dad was the last chairman of the trustees there. And I gave him a postcard advertising the sale too. And it was sold to the Forest Fields and Stream Association, which is a group of sportsmen here in Akron. And I think the Orioles bought it from them, and I don't know where it went after that, but it finally became a church again. And last Easter Sunday, it opened again as a church. So, one across from the Masonic Temple.
When did that church turn? The Methodist church.
Methodist Church.
We haven't covered the Park Theater. And many of you should remember. Now, boy, the cereals you had to go once a week at least to follow the cereal, because the train was coming to run over the heroin when it ended. Next week, you follow the next chapter. But there were a number of hometown plays produced there, almost every year. There was a hometown play, and they were good. And didn't they roller skate in there? They pushed the chairs aside and roller skated in the Park Theater.
You dance too.
Dance.
Oh, dance, sure.
That used to be a roller rink.
That was a roller rink.
Like I say, now, when the ice accident, that used to be a roller rink.
Right, at the end of the foot of Main Street was GLF, and also that was the roller rink down there.
When I was a child, I remember, I think his name was Jim Legg, used to come around and deliver vegetables. He had an old truck, and the sides opened up. Remember that? I don't know anything about him, but I can't remember his name, his wife's name. I knew it, but anybody else remember that?
Speaking of old cars, on the table there is a picture of an old Page touring car, belonged to my grandfather. And I remember hearing the story of him trying to learn how to drive it. He'd come down John Street and attempt to make the turn onto Buffalo with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake all at the same time.
Going back to the churches that Harold asked me about, I think it was in 1922 that the German Methodists finally gathered together one Sunday morning and went over and sat in the regular Methodist church we have now. Now, there's no distinction there. Both conferences were the same. They're run by the same bishops and everything. But it just said in the German church, they spoke German in. My dad and his other Bill and Ruth's father all have their handle underneath some of the minutes in the book written in German. There was 1942, early in March, or sometime in March, the whistles went off in town. I happened to have been over in Akron that day. I brought my mother over to Mrs. Wren's, her sister's, and it was at the Methodist church. And thank God that the wind was blowing towards the park that day and not the other way. They had firemen on every roof that you could see with a hose, and then sparks were going down, and it started in the organ. And the 1899 church, they built right over that, where they put the new church up, and all that roof was back in there yet. And it wasn't a privilege, but I knew where to go. I took 2 firemen up to the steeple. You could see back in there, and you could see the fire burning in them shingles, and they're just like rolled up papers. They were so dry. And it burnt, and we built a new one, and now we're going to go at it again with a renovation, we hope.
I'll tell you a story about the Park Theater too. My brother graduated in 21, and that's where they played basketball, believe it or not.
Yeah.
The seats would all fold up, well, 6 all together and fold up, and they push them in on the side of the stage. And they do that and to practice. In the afternoon, they have to get them all back so they can have a movie at night. And you can stand one end and shoot the whole width of the court. And they had big round pot-bellied stoves in the corner to heat it. All the men would stand around that so they wouldn't be diving into it and getting burned. They have it tough now.
The Park Theater was a great place during the Depression. They had a local band of Bill Burkhorn, Ted Scape, Clayton Betzel, and Russ Repson, I think. And once in a while, Shorty Cummings would sing if he was sober enough. And you could go there, and for a quarter, you could dance all night. And to this day, if you see some of the older men dancing, you can tell that they learned to dance at the Park Ballroom. Talking about food and being self-sufficient, we had a mushroom plant that grew mushrooms in the old cement mines. And they were a good outlet, sold on the markets in Buffalo, and I don't know where else they shipped them, how they preserved them, but they grew them till not too many years ago. Talking a little more about politics, the Democratic end of it was run by Cooley Altenberg and his brother Byron. They were at the tavern down on the foot of Main Street where the Akron Fire Company stands now. And Mr. Buckley, who we've heard about, and John Dodd, who ran the West Shore House and sold ice cream across where the American Legion is today, and John Price, who lived on, about halfway down from the present library. I can't tell you the number of the house. He was county clerk in 1905, and anything that happened in Erie County had to be okayed out here in Akron before they could do it. He rode the train to Buffalo. He'd get up in the morning, get cleaned up, and go down to the depot, buy his newspaper, get on the West Shore, go to Buffalo, get off on the one way downtown at Exchange Street Station, yes, and walk to the county hall, be there in 35 minutes. You can't beat that time today, no how. We were a sufficient community, and we took care of our own. The ball teams they had out here, they played over in the old, well, on Jackson Street, there was a racetrack there. They played ball in there. I played there against Akron from Parker High School. Akron was building, it didn't have a ball field. We played down in the county park at the same time in the early 30s. But things progressed, and they're progressing today, and the things that are happening, we're going to be a whole different line of community in the next 10 years. You see one thing coming and another, and it'll happen, it's bound to happen, and we might not like it, so now's the time to speak. Thank you.
One of the pictures you have on the table, John, shows a jail. I can't believe that Akron would have needed a jail, but is there anything you can tell us about that jail, or what it was like, or what?
Well, the present site of that jail is on Buffalo Street, and it's just a flat lawn right next to the alley that runs up through. And in that jail, they used to have a fire bell, and also they used to have a hose drying tower. You can see it in the picture. They pull the wet hoses up and just hang them there till they dry. Akron had 3 fire companies way back. Liberty Hose Company was the first. Cement City was the second. That was located up behind what is now the Octagon House. And then the way up in Falkirk was the Cataract hose company. That was the third one. And in one of those pictures, I think, you can see the shed where they kept the wagon, the pump wagon.
That's where grandfather and father used to belong to the one I'm talking about right now.
They did? The Cataract Hose Company?
Cataract Hose Company never lost a tug of war. That was the main event between fire companies on 4th of July. My grandfather, Ernest Tesno, and his brother, Frank Tesno, anchored it, and they couldn't move them.
Any questions from the audience? Any things that you want to share with us? Let's just go around. Mary, you'll just have to wait. No.
I just want to ask Ruth Zimmerman, who were the two ladies that ran the tea room?
Was it the tea room, Mrs. Webster, and Dorothy Webster's, remember she was one of our teachers, mother-in-law, and a Mrs. Wilder. Good cooks.
I don't know if you people know who I am. On Friday nights, I'm standing there beside Jane Downey, and I miss the beat when she misses it. So, I play in the Akron band, Corfu band, and the Indian band. When John, I can call him John now, but he was my homeroom teacher, and then when we went to school, everybody was Mr. or Mrs. or Miss. But now that I'm out and he's out, I can call him John. Do you remember one biology class, you took us up in the back of where the old bleachers are, and you lit that pipe where the natural gas come out? This was a while ago.
You scared me, Charlie. I thought you were going to say I lit a pipe full of marijuana.
No. But there used to be about a 4-inch pipe back there, and he told us not to do it, but he would show us that only just made a puff, and that was it. Then we used to get out of school. John would lock his door. He'd be out and drive our school bus. And you remember that. Down through, well, I think there was about, what, 6 buses in? And when they come high water, well, towards Rapids, Sand Hills, and when Tonawanda Creek would flood, we still went through the buses. It would run into the front door sometimes. And one time, I don't know if you was driving or Al Weatherby, but us older guys, we'd sit up on the hood and watch the edge of the road and go through. And sometimes, well, I remember once I drove a bus here, that's when the drivers were in charge of the buses. And out, I don't know where it was, over towards the reservation or out there somewhere, I did carry one of the kids up to his driveway one time and left him. And then they said, Charlie, would you ever put anybody off the bus? We didn't behave. I says, try me. The next day, that kid walked 5 miles to home. I never heard nothing about it. And do you remember Al Weatherby? Probably you do. Well, he was the first bus driver. I'm not, as long as he's passed on, I can tell this now. But that's when they carried a bucket of grit and a shovel. In hunting season, Al had the 12-gauge shotgun right up beside of him. From pheasant season, he had pheasant at night. And, we've seen that a lot of times. A lot of people don't know that. And deer season too. He had that 12-gauge sitting right up there side of it. And if he'd see a deer, why the bus would stop. And he generally didn't get one, but I can remember him shooting at one. And Ruth, Mrs. Zimmerman, Ruth. One time, Ruth, this is about you. When they had the celebration here in Akron, it wasn't the last big celebration, but 50 years before that, back in 42, 43, I can remember your family coming down Main Street on the horse and wagon. Your whole family was there. You had the cook stove going. There was somebody in a wash tub with a paring knife on his toes. I remember that. And but I can remember you. You was in your older, well, it was in the costumes at that time. And I think you was giving one of your kids a hair shampoo or something. You remember that?
Oh, yes, that was a dandy.
And when I first got into the Akron Town Band, you remember Joe Burgorn? He was on the left side of me, and John was on the right side of me. And I wasn't too good a player, but once I got done, I was. Once in a while, when John and Helen come over to the spaghetti supper over at East Pembroke, I generally lead the last number in the concert, and if John is there, well, I have him come up and take my place on the bass drum, and that's where I learned how to play. Thank you.
Speaking of bus drivers, do you remember Peg Campbell? Peg only had one leg, but let me tell you, he could go from the front of the bus to the back of the bus in about 3 steps. And you didn't fool around on his bus. You go right out the back door. I've got some pictures here of fires. And this one is R.S. Mills and Son fire that was gutted in December 23rd, 1937. I don't know, John, do you have any of these?
I have that same one, I think, over on the table.
Okay.
Mills fire.
Yeah, the Mills fire. It happened on a Saturday night, and my stepfather, Bus Mills, was in the store with his father, Bob Mills, and I believe Neil Burrow was in there. Bus went down cellar to bank the stove, or the furnace, the big coal furnace, and there were some papers that had caught fire, and then there was a wooden partition. Well, Bus came back up in the elevator. It was the only elevator in the village of Akron, I believe. And it was that old gravity type where you get in, you pull the big cord, and the elevator went up. And it went up to the second floor and all the way down to the bottom. Well, Bus came out, got on the elevator, came upstairs and said, "We got a fire downstairs. Come on down, help me put it out." So the three of them went back down. Well, the fire really got out of hand. So they said, "We've got to get out of here." And they got back in the elevator and they got halfway up and the elevator quit. So Bus stood on with his legs spread like this, and Bob Mills got on his back, and Neil Burrow got up and opened the doors and went out and got a ladder down, and that's when they called the fire department. And the only thing that saved that whole side of Main Street was that this building had double brick walls in it. And there was a lot of smoke and water damage at Stone's Drug Store on one side and Maggie George on the other side. I have, excuse me, let me, well, I'll take those pictures. I need these too. I have a couple of pictures here. John, you're going to love this one. This picture is called the Oak Cafe. It is now the filling station. And at one time it was Maz's Tavern, and then it was Randazzo's Tavern, and then it was Norman's Tavern, then it was MacArthur's Tavern, and then it was Farrell's Tavern, and I sold it to Al, and he made it the filling station, which it is right now. But there's a number of gentlemen here, and there's Frank Tesno, Joe Carney, Charlie Tesno, Louis Lawn, Earl Tesno, Ernest Tesno, Leon Tesno, John Poggles, and Chris Tesno. The other picture I have is, well, it was Kelly's bowling alley. And the name on the back, it was taken in 1907, and it's got Higgins and Belger. I don't know if this is the Belger that that built the houses or not. But one small little story, when I was delivering ice cream for Perry's, I had the Rochester run. And I went into key drugstores. Well, the last thing that you went to was the cash register, and that's where all the ice cream was. So that's where you picked your ice cream up and you went out. And I used to like to make a nice display type thing. And I was making my display, and some lady came along. She said, "Perry's ice cream, is that from Perry, New York?" I said, "No, ma'am, that's from Akron, New York." She says, "Oh, where's that?" "Well, it's a little town, it's over there." I said, "See that gumbo machine right there? Look at that, it's Ford Gum, that's made in Akron, New York." I said, "And right next to it, there's a penny saver." I said, "Look at that, that's made in Akron, New York." "See that tractor trailer out there? It's got one of those roll-up doors." I said, "You look at the nameplate, that's Whiting roll-up doors, that's made in Akron, New York." I said, "You have a lovely blouse on, and those buttons are beautiful. They were probably made by Rochester Button Company. I bet you think you're made in Rochester, huh?" I said, "No, ma'am, they're made in Akron, New York." They said, "You have a fly on your ceiling, and you need one of those long, extended fly swatters?" I said, "Those are made in Akron, New York. You probably live in a beautiful house with some plasterboard or Paris, something like that." I said, "It's probably made by Certain Teed Products or National Gypsum. That's made in Akron, New York." I don't know, it just happened to hit me. And I just kept going on, and I left. And several weeks later, I was in the same store, doing my same thing, and the same lady came up to me. She says, "Hi, Perry Ice Cream, made in Akron, New York." I came to Akron when I was about 7 years old, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It was one of the greatest places to grow up when you're a young lad. Swimming when I was like real small in the, in the fountain. And then later on, going down to Blue Bottom. I don't know, does anybody remember where Blue Bottom was? Okay, yeah. And ice skating up in the park. When you used to do crack the whip and stuff like that. Block's Pond. Who remembers where Block's Pond is? Uh-huh. Yes, we used to go down there. Mr. Block would put that big bridge across. You go over to that little semi-island. You hit that great big swing up there, and it only lasted, I don't know, 2 or 3 years or something like that. But it was just a fantastic place. I guess that's all I got. Thank you.
Could any of the panel relate stories about the Peanut Railroad and Louisville?
I moved into my house on East Avenue in the same year that the Peanut made their last venture, and I could look from my living room or bedroom up the second floor across the gully, we call it the gully, County Park, and watch the Peanut Railroad struggling to get up to Crittenden Road. I could see it at night because the firebox, every time the fireman would shovel in the coal, I could see the flame or the red spot. And I remember when the track that Paul was talking about that ran down and connected the railroad down here with the Peanut, when that was taken down, I watched also out of my bedroom, watched the engine back down with a flat car as they took the steel rails up to use in the war.
A little bit more about some of the railroad. That driveway right out here, the front driveway, is one time was a sidetracked, came down to the, well, it hooked into whatever was down there, the button factory or that, before the West Shore went through. But there was, I've been, when I was a wee kid somewhere with my dad, there was barrels sitting in the store like this, and one was probably something to drink, but the other one was a pickle barrel. And that goes back to another operation we had in Akron, the Manhattan Picking Company. For I don't know how many years over on Buell Street and Jackson Street, where the candy company had been, they processed and they didn't process them, they put them up and shipped them out. And a lot of Akron people worked there.
They also had, John, they also had a candy factory for feed and donuts.
And many of the Akron kids were picked up at 5 in the morning and taken by truck down to the Elbow Bluff to pull weeds and stuff like that, and pick up potatoes or whatever was going on. We had an energizing group of people always really get out and do something. There's one industry we've overlooked, and that's the gypsum industry. Came right after the cement companies, or along the same time. Discovered gypsum in 1901, and the first shaft was partially sunk by 1906, and they couldn't get any further because of too much water, and that was Gene Forrest, the old Bullford Construction, one of his first ventures into this area. Come in and completed the shaft for him. There was 3 places they mined in Akron, there was maybe 4. There's the one up where Ruth Zimmerman lives, back up on the gypsum, they owned the land up there, and the red tower was still standing, and the foundation where the wooden stairs went down was still there. And you could see about 70, it was down 100 feet to about 70 foot of water. And the kids would work on that top till they got it open. And you never hear of anybody disappearing, but it would have been that kind of place. Now it's covered with concrete, thank goodness. That one, that was the American company. They folded up, and the National Gypsum eventually emerged and bought them out. And they're over on the right road. And then Certainty was down here. And we're talking about the gypsum mines, and they're back in the newspaper this week. If many of you recall, when my great-grandfather was still, before, when they farmed there yet, and the gypsum first came in, they had to go to the mine one morning and get a couple of their cows. Well, this the other day, Dad Mooning is plowing down through his field, and all of a sudden the tractor and the plow and everything went down in the hole. It did, it happened. He's back getting the field all plowed, and he got the tractor out and everything, and it just, things of the past come back and remind you once in a while. Take care, we're still here.
We're sitting on a mining town, right? The only place that isn't mined is up there in the cemetery.
What do you see?
The only place that isn't mined is under the village and the cemetery.
Hi, 2 things I remember as a town kid. In the summer, we would, well, 3 things. We would paddle around in the park pool, and Harry's would open up a little window down by their plant, and we could buy vegetables for a penny a piece. I remember that. Boy, every kid in town was there. And when it got really hot, and your parents had a locker, at Harry's locker, you'd go in to get the meat. You'd always volunteer to do it because it was nice and cool in there.
And if you knew the people who work there at night, usually you could get some fudgicles free.
I would just like to ask the gentleman where the Blue Bottom was. You talked about swimming?
Blue Bottom, you know where the laundromat is on Cedar Street? Across from Pixley's old store?
Okay.
If you go right straight west, follow that, that's where it is.
Oh.
And it was also deepened, I understand, by a couple of Akron residents with dynamite.
Yes.
So to make a swimming hole there. Yeah, there was Blue Bottom, Tucker's Bathtub, Blux's, were some of the places on Murder Creek that all had names, and Twin Trees was another place. All fishing places.
Behind that laundry
Yeah, the circus behind that laundromat.
Circus behind?
Yeah, probably before they dynamited it out. And Akron, the village, there's very many veins of gypsum been mined out in the village because my folks sold land to the gypsum company. And I had a brother who was killed in the gypsum mine.
Okay. Identify yourself for me.
I'm Helga Dewey.
My understanding is that also that area behind the laundromat, that part that's a swamp, when the mines were operating, all the water went down, and they had a baseball field over there. So it would be a nice area to have baseball, and as you said, would you call it a circus or something that was there? But then when they closed the mines, the water came back up, and all of that has gone back to wetlands. Anybody else from the audience? I see that, we're getting closer over here and closer, so we're getting closer to the time. Here's...
I didn't grow up in Akron, but I came here 51 years ago. And about the last 14 years, I worked for John Eckerson's father. And if anything that anybody is missing, and that is to visit the elderly people. Anybody that's old, go and visit them. When I worked for him, I cooked for him. And after I'd get through with the dishes, and I'd sit and talk with him. And I got to know Akron as if I had grown up here, because he told me stories from the time he was a child. I just wish I could remember all of them. But the one I remember most, I guess, is he told me about when he saw the first car that came to Akron. I said, do you remember when they had the first car? And he said, well, it was the first one that came to Akron. And he told me who had the first car, but I can't remember. And he said, oh, I was playing on the street, and he said, all of a sudden this thing came, he said it, and I looked, and he said, there was no horse in the front of it. And he said, and it was going, and he said, so I said, I ran alongside of it, and he said, and I was running right, keeping up with this car. It was going up the hill, and he said, it wasn't going very fast. But he said, and then he also told me, which John hasn't said, his father graduated from Michigan, and he was in engineering, and he worked under or was training with the men who were the big wheels in Detroit making cars. And he told me when had to take the cars out, and this would have been, I suppose, in the early 1900s. And he said they were in Pennsylvania, and he said in those days it was all mud roads and mud hills. And he said they were trying to get these cars to see if they could go over the hill. And he said there was about 6 men. And he said they got at the bottom of the hill, and they all had to get out, and they had to push the car over the hill, because he said the engine wasn't strong enough, to get the car to go over. And I remember when I got a brand new car when I was working for him, and I was so proud of my car, and I drove to work, and I went in and I said, Mr. Eckerson, I got a new car. And I'm thinking of the new car because it was a pretty color, and so he said, oh, I've got to see it. He went out, he didn't even look at it outside of the car. He lifted the engine up, and he started telling me all about the engine, because but I can just remember so many things of all the things that I learned from Ransom Eckerson. I wish I could have written a book of the things that he told me.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to share anything, or want to ask a question of the panel, or anything from the panel? Anybody wants to say anything else? Okay, I'm going to turn it back over.
I want to because he's an old-time resident of Akron, and he knows a lot of the things that happened here. It is amazing when you walk down Main Street and you look at those buildings and you figure we had delicatessens, we had meat markets, we had shoe stores, we had barrel makers, blacksmiths. We had some of the finest limestone. Which bridge did they send that limestone to build in New York City? I don't know if it was the Brooklyn Bridge or one of them. The Brooklyn Bridge? We had some of the finest limestone that we barreled it up in Akron and we sent it down to the Brooklyn Bridge, and they said that it was the best they could buy, and the bridge is still there, so it must have been pretty good. I am proud to be, and I'm not an Akronite, I wasn't born here, I was born in Depew. My dad, though, can remember taking cattle down the middle of Main Street and taking them over to market over on William Street, taking them to the slaughterhouses. So my dad was born here, Sam Freeman was born here, they have the farm where Kelly Schultz is now, so I am and I'm not an Akronite. I guess I was born in the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever, but I finally made my way back. And I am very proud to be a member of this town and this village, and also to represent you people in the political job that I have. And I want to thank Louis for having such a good panel, and I want to thank the panel. It was wonderful, and we expect to see you guys back a lot of times and bring back a lot more memories with you. And someday probably I'll be sitting up there telling the younger people the memories that I have of Akron. My dad, when I was young, I remember coming to the parades, and that was a big thing. 4th of July parade in Akron. I remember on his shoulders, and I would sit there somewhere along Main Street and watch the parade. And then the other one naturally was in Clarence when they had the park parade over there on Labor Day. So those were two of the big events that I can remember when I was a kid, always coming back to Akron. We want to thank everyone for coming. Make sure, please, that you sign the little list over there, because it's very important, because our grants that we have depend on the attendance that we report to the state so that we can get money to help our Octagon House and pay for some of the bills. The refreshments are over there. We want to really thank everyone for coming out tonight and give a good round of applause for these panel people.